There's a lot more involved there in creating this layered music system. You're trying to capture the sound and feel of the environment. The energy levels intensity levels are very high in motion picture advertising. What you're doing essentially is telling a story in a very short period of time. It's far more of a layered experience, I think, as a composer writing for games. And it also depends on what game you're scoring. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, we scored the last two Splinter Cells for Ubisoft, and those had very dynamic music systems. And they were based on what was taking place for your character in the environment that you were in. So if you were, he's a spy, so if you're kind of stealthing around in the shadows or whatever, we would have a base layer, a foundation layer, which was low energy, low intensity. And then we had to build layers on top of this that were playing concurrently. The computer hadn't unmuted them yet, but they were playing concurrently in the event that something happened on screen. You get into a fight or a firefight or, something exciting happens. The system would dynamically switch from the base layer to the next intensity layer. And your music, so we were dealing with a 3-layer system, the music had to be able to jump from layer 1 to layer 3, back to layer 2, for anywhere, basically, at any moment. And it had to line up perfectly. It had to make sense musically. So as far as tempo is concerned, or your key signatures, your instrumentation, you had to be very aware of how these layers were constructed, because dynamically the system would be jumping around between cues, essentially, based on what's happening on screen. So to answer the question, there's a lot more involved there in creating this layered music system than you would have in a film, for example, or a television, where, of course, there's a story arc, there's an emotional arc in the scene, but you're playing one piece of music, and you're following a linear story. You're following, as the scene plays out. So with the games, it's a little bit, it can be a little bit more involved, and that's technically more involved, emotionally a little bit more involved, and then you move on to something like our most recent games, which are racing games, and they don't have a principal character. So in there, you're trying to capture the sound and feel of the environment. You're in, you're in Monaco, or, you're at the Nürburgring or someplace, and, you're choosing these beautiful cars. And so during those menu sequences, or before the race, or during the race, I think it's a lot more about the emotionality of the environment and the preparation mentally for the race. And then when you're in the race, the only real consideration is sound effects. Because there's other cars racing with you, there's tire noise, people are hitting walls, and metal sounds and engine noises, and so the consideration really becomes music versus sound effects and environmental sound, as opposed to sort of like the emotional journey of a principal character in a game. So I think video games have a unique set of parameters, or a paradigm, a mindset when approaching the score, as opposed to something like a film or television show or commercial. It's more involved. Sometimes you start from the bottom and then build up into the most intense layers. So, or sometimes you write the most intense layer first, and then you're sort of deconstructing it. It's a little arbitrary, you know what I mean? Because then you have to, because it's not just the 2 layers, it's 3. So you kind of have to decide what this middle layer is going to be as well. But the trick with it is, like, let's say, for example, you start with a layer 3, which is the most intense. You can't just mute stuff, because then you're left with nothing. You know what I mean? The base layer, for example, has to be able to stand on its own as an interesting piece of music. What if this particular player doesn't get into firefights or doesn't go towards the action very often. Maybe they like stealthing around and hiding in shadows, which means that they're going to be hearing layer 1 a lot. You know what I mean? So our job is to make sure that every layer really does stand alone as an interesting piece of music that may be on loop for however many minutes that player is in that environment. So I don't have a straight answer for that. I think it's just, sometimes you start from the bottom up, sometimes you start from the top down. But all throughout all of it, you do have to try to maintain a sense of interest, a sense of musicality, as if that's the only piece of music, that particular layer. Stems become very important then for the audio directors, because then they're able to dynamically make changes without taking too much away of the music. But they can make changes, they'll be ducking in volume, but they'll also be ducking as far as the instrumentation goes in order to not compete with sound effects that are going on, especially in like a race environment in a game like Forza. It can get pretty noisy. So, they want to be able to keep things at an even level, so to speak, as opposed to turning into cacophony. We've had the great opportunity of actually being able to write thematic material for many of the games. With Splinter Cell, for example, we wrote a theme for the game. And I'm not sure that the game series, prior to us coming on board, really had a principal theme. So outside of the main theme, no, I wouldn't say that there's a lot in the way of leitmotif. I think there's instrumentation or motifs that maybe have relevance to the environments that you're in. Because they travel in the game, they travel to various parts of the world. So there's a little bit of flavor of those parts of the worlds that we imbue into the score. But outside of the principal theme, there wasn't much more in the way of thematic material. In Forza, it's actually the same thing. They didn't have a principal theme for the game, a Forza Motorsport theme. So we were very privileged to be able to write something. And that was cool because then you were able to repeat it throughout the score. You were able to expand upon it. And bring what feels like thematic material to the score, the body of the score. So for the majority of the time, the cues are designed to loop, and that's just how it has to work. But I think the audio directors in the video game publishers, the developers rather, they do an incredible job of making music seamless, moving piece to piece, moving from environment to environment, from menu to menu, and really making the transition from a piece of music to another seamless. So that's really to their credit. That's not something that I could take credit for. They really work to massage the music's usage in the games to the point where it becomes seamless to the user. As far as our delivery goes, unless it's like a cinematic cutscene, if you've got a cutscene, it's a video, then obviously it has a beginning and an end. It's scored to picture, it's like scoring anything else that's a linear static thing. But other than that, we would typically be delivering things that are loopable, and then we leave it to them. We've done some games that have had, maybe 30 or 45 minutes of music. Most of the larger titles that we've had, the pleasure of scoring, they're 2 hours or more of original music. And the process can take months or, in one case, we were scoring for about a year. There were some changes to the game, and then we had to come back, and then there was several more months of scoring. So it went on for a while. But yeah, usually it's quite a lot of music, yeah. Yeah, so the trailer industry is it's a fascinating industry. I mean, the trailers almost all of the time don't have the music from the film in them. Sometimes we come on board way before the score for the film is even done. And, oftentimes because of the way that they want to present the film in the advertising campaigns, the score from the film may not even be the correct, most effective way to present the trailers. So one thing that we find is very consistent is energy. Like the energy levels intensity levels are very high in motion picture advertising. They're telling a story in a short amount of time. They really want to, make it exciting. They really want people to want to come and see the film when it's released. And so, for the most part, you're writing music that's high intensity. It's really ramping from beginning to end. It's really growing and, has to be exciting. So in that sense, what you're doing essentially is telling a story in a very short period of time. So you're trying to do what a score would do, but in a really short period of time. But there's a lot in common with all the other avenues of music that we work in, as far as like the production technique, instrumentation, the influences. I think there's a lot of influence from film music. There's a lot of influence from popular music. We try to pull all those things in and make it as modern and current as we can. We have an excellent relationship with the client base, so there's always a lot of feedback, which is very helpful. There's a lot of people working in this field, but our aim here has always been to write interesting original music that we hope sort of may present some new ideas or new approaches to the client base when they're doing these trailers. And their requirements are very heavy. They've got a lot to do in short periods of time. Their back is against the wall most of the time, so they're very hungry for new music. So we're trying to give them something new, something different, something maybe that they hadn't thought of, that hadn't come up before. While at the same time making sure that the music is built, it's constructed, it's composed in a way that is useful for them. Because that's the other thing, they have to be able to work with it, they have to be able to edit it, they have to be able to create the sense of intensity and urgency. So there's always this mindset that we have when we're creating the music, that it has to be helpful to the client to make it viable for them. But perhaps at the same time we can present something new on the side and kind of guide their hand somewhere. Who knows?